Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When the discussion is about who is at the Jazz Fest this year, The Who is part of the answer. And if people go Gaga over the lineup, well, she's here too. We'll discuss this year's stellar Jazz Fest, as well as the future of libraries, the latest from the legislature, a hazardous waste neighborhood, and an indictment in St. Tammany Parish. Our Future Watch segment examines the benefits and hazards of new bike paths. Who is with us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Richard Webster, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And we're going to go over to Stephanie first. And there was an indictment on former St. Tammany DA Walter Reed.
And his son, actually, both indicted this week by the new not new anymore, U.S. Attorney Kenneth Polite. This is a long time coming. If you've been following the news, obviously there have been investigations, there have been press investigations and official investigations into Walter Reed, and a big indictment came down this week, 18 counts. If convicted of everything, his exposure is 277 years, which obviously it would be much less than that. But and his son also, who would not be exposed to as much. But basically the idea is it's a conspiracy indictment, and Walter Reed, who was the DA in St. Tammany and Washington parishes for many, many years, generally had no opposition, but he had a campaign fund. And he had a good thing going. I guess if you read the indictment, that's the message there. What he's being accused of in part is basically using that campaign fund for all manner of personal expenses, dinners, Thanksgiving dinner with his family, paying his son. That's why his son is indicted for some services that were probably less expensive than what he paid, video, catering at a fundraiser. The son then used the money to allegedly pay off some loans. That's the big thing. Flowers for his daughter, a party for a 17-year-old who probably was his son, a housewarming party for himself, a dinner with evangelical ministers who he was hoping to recruit as clients in his private law firm, all with campaign money. What's interesting is, one of the things that's interesting is his lawyer had a press conference after, which is pretty unusual. That means I think he's going to fight, at least initially, and said, this was not public money, this is campaign money. People need to understand that. And of course, the laws governing campaign money are looser. They are not, you can't do anything with campaign money, but it's harder to prosecute somebody. But basically the allegation is fraud, that he collected this money allegedly for campaigns and put it to personal use. The other big part of the indictment had to do with the St. Tammany Parish Hospital, which is something that's been written about quite a bit. Walter Reed had a contract, the DA's office actually had a contract to provide legal services to the hospital. Walter Reed basically was paid personally. Let me take that back. Walter Reed had a deal to provide legal services. He would sometimes send somebody from the district attorney's office, so that was somebody on public payroll.
So did he personally have the deal? Was it?
It's confusing. There's back and forth on that. The hospital says one thing, he says another thing. There doesn't seem to be good paperwork, but the money went to him, basically, even
not
when
to the DA's office.
A public employee was attending these meetings on his behalf. So that's part of the indictment too.
And so the prosecutors are alleging that it should have gone to the DA's office,
Yes.
these dollars.
Yes.
So most of these charges then are stemming, as you said, from the campaign fund. Are any stemming from the DA's office and his actions in the DA's office?
It's the main, it's always with federal charges, it's always wire fraud and things like that. But fraud is the big allegation.
Errol?
You've seen lately a lot of investigations from suburban areas. I mean, in St. Tammany Parish, with the coroner and the DA, and in St. Bernard and Plaquemines. And I don't think there's anything in the water or in the air, but I think the difference is in the political culture, where there's not much watchdogging that goes out there. I mean, there's not like a really active investigative media for one, or perhaps the types of organizations that watch government closely.
Inspector generals.
Right, there's inspector generals. And so those kind of, and there's not as much political cleavage. It's pretty much everybody's on the same side politically. And so I think there's a lot more flexibility out there and a lot less discipline by knowing that people are watching you. That you may have in other areas.
Well, it's interesting. Some of these people have been in office for years. Aaron Broussard certainly goes way back. Walter Reed goes way back. And I think, you get used to doing things a certain way and nobody calls you on it. That's kind of the understanding.
You start to feel like you have permission, I think.
Exactly.
And so the charge against Walter Reed's son, his name is Stephen, right?
Yes.
No, his attorney said this was really just not necessary.
His attorney, and this is something that the U.S. attorney has done in other cases, Greg Meffert's case, a few others. His attorney basically says the U.S. attorney indicted Walter Reed's son to try to get him to plead. And I mean, you go back to Edwin Edwards, this is something that is a tool in the toolbox of prosecutors. And we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, that sometimes it is motivation. I mean, with Greg Meffert, one of the reasons he did plead guilty was to get rid of the charges against his wife because they had 2 young children.
So what comes next in this?
Then, you know, he'll have his first appearance, and if you listen to the lawyers, it seems like there will not be a quick plea deal. That doesn't mean there won't be one down the road, but I think we're, as of today, heading for trial.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Richard, to you, you did a few pieces, really, about the Agriculture Street landfill and the unfortunate people who remain living on it, and there seems to be nothing for them to do. Why don't you background us first? What are we talking about with this landfill?
So it's about 95 acres of land in, I guess, the Upper Ninth Ward. From 1909 to about 1958, it was the city's main waste dump. Basically all forms of trash went there, toxic waste. Reopened in '65 for Hurricane Betsy. It was open for about 9 months. They just burned all the debris that was there. So in the late '60s, the federal government was giving out money to create homeowner opportunities for low-income people, get them out of the projects. So they built Press Park, which was 221 townhouses. Then in the late '70s, they built Gordon Plaza, which was 67 individual houses you could buy. And then it was, well, go ahead.
And this was all on this landfill,
All
this
on the
property,
landfill, yeah.
Which, at that time, was it known to be a toxic dump?
I don't think, when it was being used as the dump, the disposal of toxic waste was not regulated really, and it wasn't until the '70s. They passed the Superfund law in 1980, but they knew, in the '70s they started testing the soil because they wanted to build more houses, and the results of those tests were lost, and they could never, So I think they knew what was happening.
But I think also at the time, this would have been during the era of Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, and you can't say it was like anti-black politics, because by this time the blacks are becoming in the majority, and as far as the voting, and Moon Landrieu was elected in '69 and others. But so I think this was well intended.
Yeah, it was.
I think there was never, let's try to solve a problem, but it was just solved badly.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably an argument. I mean, I think it was well intended because they were building homes for people who wanted to be, it was a slice of the American dream. Whether they would have built homes on a toxic dump for other people, I question, I mean, this is low-income black families. Would they have built,
But did
luxury
they know
homes?
the severity of a toxic dump then?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, this was named a Superfund site, too. I mean,
Yeah, in
so this was
1994.
really high-level toxic dump.
Yeah, it was one of the worst. And most Superfund sites, people live around it or next to it. This was rare because people actually lived on the Superfund.
And a school was built there, too.
Moton Elementary School.
Moton School, when ultimately closed.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move forward. And Hurricane Katrina, what happened to the neighborhood with Katrina?
I mean, the whole thing was flooded. The entire thing was flooded. The only people living there now are people who lived in the individual homes, but after it was named a Superfund site, the people of the community entered into a class action lawsuit, sued the school board, Hanno, the city. 2006, Judge Nadine Ramsey, now council member, she ruled that the school board, the city, Hanno, and 4 insurers of Hanno were liable. There was no doubt. She said they lied to the people about the site. They didn't tell them. They didn't clean it up. But the city, Hanno, and the school board are protected by the state constitution. They basically can't have their assets seized. So you can get judgments all day long against them.
But not get
and
anything
it's
out of it.
worthless.
Yeah.
So the 4 insurers of Hanno paid $14.2 million. Half of that went to the 5 attorneys who represented the people and a court administrator, leaving $7 million for basically 5,000 residents, which equals about $1,000 per person.
How many people are still there?
There's no accurate count, but there's people who live there say probably about like 24 families.
24. And there were townhouses that people purchased, right? They were
Yeah.
renting, leasing to purchase.
Yeah.
That individuals,
fenced off.
they own them still.
Right.
They own them, but they cannot access them, you said.
Right, they can't. They're fenced off, they own them, but because of the litigation, Hannah won't let them get near them. And then last, just the main point is the remediation that the EPA did after it was declared a Superfund site. They took the top 2 feet of soil, and it was the toxic waste went 20 feet down. So they put a permeable fabric, 2 feet of clean dirt, and said, you guys are good to go. And they only did that on 10% of the land. So they didn't do it under any buildings, under the streets. So you basically have 2 feet of clean soil surrounded by a sea of just toxic waste.
What can be done with this land?
I mean, you can't build any more residential properties out there, so it would have to be developed into an industrial site, something like that. I mean, God help anybody who wants to live there. You know?
And so the folks who are still there, I mean,
Yeah.
what can be done for them, and what recourse do they have? Like you said, they're getting about $1,000. Did you say?
The courts are. I mean, they have no other recourse in the courts unless the city finally magically says we're going to give you guys money. Which, you know, what are the chances of that? So I talked to the council. You know, some members are asking private developers if they can do something. Councilmember Brissett sent a letter to the Office of Community Development in the state in Baton Rouge asking for some funds. Basically, the only thing to do is to get money to move them out of there. You know,
That's the only thing. I mean, that's not looking like it's going to happen anytime soon.
sadly,
and
no.
then, and really quickly touch on health issues too. Are folks there suffering a greater incidence of diseases?
So there was because there were 49 cancer-causing chemicals in 150 chemicals in total that were found on the site, but there's not enough science available that can link one specific chemical to one specific disease. But there have been multiple studies done in this area, and there are 60% higher levels of breast cancer, respiratory problems. So there's no doubt that the people living there, this has affected them negatively. Their
So
health.
the people living there still are asking the city to do something for us and move us out.
Yes.
That's what that
and
is, yeah.
the city said we put in new streetlights, so
Okay.
there you go.
All right, Richard, thanks a lot. Okay, Stephanie, over to you. Libraries, there's an issue coming up before the voters, next weekend, right?
May 2nd, yes.
And this is to ask for what?
To ask for a millage, 2.5 mils to support the libraries, basically. This is, I think one of the things to really know about this election is this is not to maintain what we have now. This is to either increase service or really decrease service, because the libraries are running out of money basically, and they get very little money from the city general fund. Many years they don't get any money from the city. They do have a small millage, but basically they've been living off their reserves. Obviously a lot of branches closed down after Katrina, so they were able to build up some reserves, and now that most of them are open, we've had some beautiful new libraries that were built with FEMA money replacements, but they just don't have the money to operate them anymore. If this is voted down, what they're saying is that possibly 6 of the 14 libraries could close. They would have to reduce hours, they would have to reduce staff. If it passes, they are hoping to extend hours, I think 30 or 35%, maybe open a lot of the branch libraries on Fridays where they are closed, Sundays even, some of them, extend, have a bookmobile, have technology, all the things that you need to do. Certainly libraries have become technology centers now. People come and use them for, internet, and you can get ebooks and all of that, you need to keep up.
So in terms of tax increase, what would the property owners be facing here?
So it's an additional 2.5 mils. It's not huge.
It's on top of what already exists.
Correct. It's basically one of the arguments that the library people are making is that the libraries are really just so underfunded compared to other systems, other places. They point to basically every parish in the area spends more per capita. Jefferson Parish spends twice as much. St. John the Baptist spends 4 times as much. East Baton Rouge more than 3 times as much. They have a beautiful library system. And even some other cities that have, real financial trouble, the way New Orleans does. I mean, Gary, Indiana, Oakland, Detroit, they all spend more per capita on libraries than we do. So it's really just, New Orleans just doesn't really have a history of funding these.
Not only that, but voters, at least since Katrina, haven't been inclined to create a new tax.
Exactly,
There have been things, the most famous, I guess, was the Audubon Park
right.
proposal that they just haven't voted on. And maybe they got used to all these years of getting all this federal money and
Right.
living off of this.
Oh, I should say, speaking of federal money, one of the things on the wish list is to rebuild the Nora Navra Library in the 7th Ward, which they have the FEMA money to build it. They just don't have the money to operate it.
So I'm saying, if this
So-
is defeated, it's going to be a real message that voters
It
just don't want to pay
is.
taxes. It's going to be one that's concerned. I will say this, politically, it's a good strategy because usually these kind of things you put on a low turnout election, and you can't have a lower turnout election than on
Right.
a Saturday
and the
of
people
Jazz
who
Fest.
are
Yeah.
And then,
supporting it are very passionate about it.
yeah,
There's no
and
organized
You
opposition.
get your chronic
No,
voter
but
turnout.
BGR
Other than
came out against it, right.
BGR put out a report basically saying their strategic plan isn't good enough, and there are all these other needs that need to be funded. So they recommended a no vote for now, hoping the libraries would come back. But there's no real organized opposition, and you are starting to see signs all over town. The people who love libraries are pretty passionate about them.
Before the
so-
voters in Orleans Parish next Saturday, May
Yes.
2nd. All right, Stephanie, thanks a lot. Over to Future Watch and Dawn. And we seem to be seeing a lot more people on bicycles lately, and they're sharing the roads with cars, which doesn't always work out too well.
It does sometimes and it doesn't other times. I have a kind of a tale of two systems. Before Katrina, New Orleans had only 5 miles of bike lanes in the city. By the end of this year, once the Lafitte Greenway opens, the city will have 100 miles of designated bikeways that are trails, shared lanes, and designated bike lanes. Last year, the city was recognized by the League of American Bicyclists as a silver bicycle-friendly community. Other cities in that category are Austin, Boston, Chicago, New York, Washington, and Philadelphia. So it's a good group of cities to be ranked with. And the city told me today, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Jernigan, that New Orleans ranks 5th highest in major cities with the percentage of people commuting by bicycle. But the big maybe talking issue would be the Barone Street bike lane that is a 6-month pilot program. It opened in December. It took an entire lane, the right lane of Barone Street, from Canal Street to Calliope and made it designated for bikes. There were residents and business owners who fought it and got a temporary injunction against it going in. They ultimately lost that battle. I talked to one of those business owners and property owners today, and he said he has yet to see any positive aspect of this bike lane. He's not seeing lots of bikes using it. He's seeing a ton of traffic build up in that left lane. Several of the business people and commuters I talked to in that area of downtown said it's kind of a disaster, because people don't seem to understand. There's lack of education, maybe more than anything, that is a bike lane, so the cars are still driving in the designated bike lane. There's parking on the far side. So how it goes, you've got parking on the left lane that's for cars, the right lane that's for bikes, and then the far right for parking again. So you have to cross over that bike lane if you're parking on the right side. And the businesses say, we need that parking along Barone Street. We're not giving up our parking. But it has been what they say a nightmare for commuters. The city says we're still looking at it. We're assessing it. Here's the rub, though. The federal government paid to stripe that bike lane and paint it and make it a designated bike lane. So everybody who's kind of opposed to it said there's no way, even if the city finds that this isn't working so well, there's no way the city's going to pay to unstripe the street. We'll see what really happens when the study period is finished in a couple of months. But I didn't hear a whole lot of good reports. I did hear one business owner tell me that the sidewalk has gotten safer because the cyclists are now on the street instead of on the sidewalk. I had another one tell me, I frankly haven't seen the bikes. I haven't seen the reason for having the bike lanes. So it really doesn't all seem to be adding up yet.
So we see other streets around the city, like Esplanade or in Carrollton,
Where it's
or Marconi,
shared.
where yes, it's shared. That's not designated then necessarily.
And maybe that's the better way to go, where the cars and the bikes know they're sharing the road, but they don't have to give up a whole lane. On this Barone Street example, I'm sorry that I don't have visualization for folks, but as you head to Calliope, the bikes are in the right lane, the cars are in the left lane, and the cars have to cross that bike lane to hop on the expressway, and they're rushing to get out of town, and they're in traffic. Nothing horrible has happened yet, but commuters keep saying something bad is going to happen as the bikes go straight to head uptown and the cars go right to get onto the expressway. They say it's dangerous. They don't think they're going to see it go away, though. They don't see it bringing any more business.
Errol, did
But
you
for long as there have been automobiles and bicycles, they have shared roads before. why is this necessary? I mean, if you have a good bike rider, and a good bike rider knows how to be safe and with it. And
well, good question. Last week, the City Council established the Pedestrian and Bike Safety Advisory Committee, and this committee will advise the city and citizens, recommend guiding principles and policies, apparently, and raise public awareness. And I think that's the big issue here, is that there isn't enough public awareness. The drivers don't know what the cyclists are doing. The cyclists don't know what the drivers are doing, and it seems like there just needs to be more education to maybe make it work.
And the cyclists kind of sneak up alongside you. You don't even know that they're there. So to me, it's dangerous.
They're supposed to obey the rules of the road.
Right. Well, driving here today, I had a cyclist driving towards me on the road. The cyclists are supposed to go with traffic and be in the right lane. They're not supposed to go against traffic and be in the right lane.
Yeah.
So I think the cyclists might need education as much as the commuters do.
And if the pilot program worked out, so then that would mean that possibly throughout the city we might see
more of that.
Well, just an entire lane for bicycles.
Well, and here, the Barone Street example, here you have a major artery out of the city that I'm told between 4:30 and 6:15 is a parking lot now, because there's a whole lane of traffic gone to drivers.
Okay, well, we need to move on now over to Errol and talk about Jazz Fest. And there are some amazing acts this year.
Here's a trivia question. Does anybody remember the year the Saints played and won in the Super Bowl, who the halftime act was? Well, in the interest of time, it was the Who. Okay, which I always thought was kind of cool, like with Who That's and the Who and all of that, and the Who performing. This year's Jazz Fest, ever since Katrina, those first couple of years after Katrina, just a lot of big names wanted to come just to help the community. And now I think, I don't know if it's a residual from that it got such a reputation, but this year's Jazz Fest is just so stacked with big names. And I was reading an interview with Quint Davis, and he says, look, every year I start off with this list of names that I want, and usually maybe I get a few of them. This year I got everyone that I wanted. We got, and so it's just a huge influence. I mean, imagine Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett performing tomorrow, and it's just incredible. I think one thing people wonder about, I guess in the long run it jacks up the ticket prices, but the original mission, they call it the Jazz Fest, was supposed to be about giving coverage to jazz. Does this really take away from it? I think in the long run it helps, just because it brings more people into one area, and if in fact while they're there they say, well, let's go hear jazz, then I think it helps. But but certainly the big name draw has become really important to it. But I've always said that I think the biggest contribution, I think, to the Jazz Fest is that there are some music forms, some native music forms. And I think the Mardi Gras Indians would be one. I think jazz and Zydeco and Cajun music and church music and gospel music that would not exist in the quantity that they do today were it not for the Jazz Fest giving an annual forum for them to go and play. There just wouldn't be the reason or the market support. And so that, and then when you got these producers that come into town and to me that's one of his greatest contributions. But this is, if only the weather cooperates, this year would be a stellar Jazz Fest.
That's right, and kicking off today and again next week.
With Keith Urban. I mean, it starts off with a big name and goes all the way through.
All right, Errol, thanks a lot. Okay, another festival of sorts, kind of, maybe, in Baton Rouge, the legislature. And we had
lot less fun.
Yeah, a lot less fun, right. But there was some action that came out of Senate Finance Committee.
Yes. We've been hearing some about the inventory tax. That's one of the areas that Governor Jindal has identified as a way to possibly free up some revenue to help fill this $1.6 billion budget hole. The Finance Committee with the support of the leadership, so the Senate is looking to take that up, but do something kind of different from what the governor has suggested. Yeah. The governor has suggested basically getting rid of the state rebate of the inventory tax, most of it that's paid to parishes. That would be a tax cut. That would be, because of some accounting maneuvers, he would consider it a spending issue, not a tax issue. But basically, it's a big loss of expenditures for the state, so that would free up some money.
But the businesses would have to pay.
The problem is the businesses still pay the parishes under his scenario. So lobby, the big business lobby, they've been yelling and screaming about that, and the senators have heard them. So what they're now proposing is to get rid of the entire tax, to have a constitutional amendment. Voters would have to approve it, so that way you would get rid of what the state pays out, because the state pays a rebate and you don't rebate something that's not there. Right. So now everything goes downhill. So now business is happy, but the the people who are unhappy are the people who run these local parishes, who are looking at some really significant loss of revenue potentially if this happens. All the big parishes have, the sheriff of Baton Rouge said he would lose $6 million. People testified from New Orleans, from St. Bernard. Newell Normand has been up there talking. The biggest percentages would be the industrial parishes, probably along the river, St. John and St. Charles and St. James. Would lose basically a huge portion of their budget. They would have to maybe shift the burden onto residents. So they came up and they basically said, do not do this. Please do not do this to us. And the senators on this committee voted 9-1. They looked them in the eye and said, we're going to do it. Don't worry. We're going to take care of you. We're going to make you whole.
Trust us.
Trust us.
Yeah.
How would they? So basically what they've promised to do is find a way to make the parishes whole while they are trying to find all this other money to make the state whole. And who knows how
But
much
who knows? I mean, where would that money come from? There was no
I don't
explanation
know.
of that.
A few people raised the issue. A few of the senators raised the issue, and Robert Adley, who's the sponsor of this measure, basically said, "You have my word."
And basically that was it. That's
That
what
was it.
He repeated.
And he
just kept
said, "If you
saying,
don't pass
"Trust me."
this, I'm going to go back to Bobby Jindal's proposal. So you should pass this," and they did. So now it goes back to this bill does. That supposedly sends a signal to the House, which has to start looking at revenue-raising measures. So if you get rid of that, Bobby Jindal will only approve something that has an offset. So now if you get rid of the money that the state pays out in inventory tax, they are free to look at some revenue enhancements, which they're going to start to do this week.
We will see. And I'm going to have to wrap this up right now. And if you
Yes.
want to take a look at it, you can go to www.legis.la.gov. And that's really a good website. And you can follow along with these committee hearings or even the sessions of the House and the Senate. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Okay, time to look ahead.
Well, despite its name, New Orleans' airport has never been much of an international airport, but they'll take one baby step in June 24th, when an airline called Copa Airlines will start nonstop flights 4 times a week between New Orleans and Panama City, Panama. Not the one in Florida, but the one in Panama. And it's a legitimate airline. It flies 737s, the kind of planes that Southwest Airlines flies. But once you get to Panama City, it has a whole network that goes into Central America and South America. So this could be nonstop flights, at least, get you to Central America and then expand from there. So it's a good first step.
All right, Errol. Thanks, Stephanie.
Back to the legislature. Some of these spending measures the House will consider this week. I would say look for a cigarette tax, which will probably be increased pretty significantly in the state. There's a solar tax rebate. There are some other things that are kind of considered low-hanging fruit, and
All right.
that's included.
Thanks, Steph. Dawn.
Early voting ends tomorrow for the library measure and everything else on the ballot. Early voting closes tomorrow.
All righty, Dawn. Thanks, Richard.
Pretty soon the council is going to take up the noise ordinance again. And if you remember last time, that was incredibly contentious, so it should be interesting.
All right, always is. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. Thank you for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.